This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
Christian nationalism is in the news, but what is it? Does it always include violence? And is there a difference between Christian nationalists and Christians who post lawn signs and vote every November? We're going to talk about this today on Family Life's Inside Out. I'm Martha Manikas Foster, and my guest today is political theorist, professor, Army veteran, and author Dr. Paul D. Miller. Dr. Miller served as a military intelligence officer for the Army, as an intelligence analyst for the CIA, and as a member of the National Security Council staff during the George W. Bush and Barack Obama administrations. He's currently professor of the practice of international affairs at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Affairs. Dr. Miller is currently writing a book on the American progressive movement, but among his already published books and articles is the 2022 book, The Religion of American Greatness: What's Wrong with Christian Nationalism? Welcome, Paul, to Inside Out.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
I'm delighted to talk with you on this topic. I wanted a knowledgeable Christian to talk about nationalism, a word and concept that has a definition with roots that go back to perhaps as long ago as the late 1700s, and a word and concept that's woven through current events. So if we can start here, what is nationalism? More specifically, what distinguishes the nationalism in the U.S. today as Christian nationalism?
Yeah, those are really important questions, and the debate about Christian nationalism is almost entirely about how you define it. But if you think that government has a job as a matter of law and policy to make us a certain kind of people, to uphold and give a kind of a supremacy to Christianity in the public square, I'm going to call that Christian nationalism, and I think it's wrong. I think it's foolish, both constitutionally and, more importantly, theologically as well.
So patriotism is different from nationalism, and you're a public servant, a veteran of the Afghan War. What questions can we ask of a situation or of ourselves that could help distinguish between patriotism and Christian nationalism?
Yeah, so patriotism, I think, is a good thing. I think it's simply a stance of gratitude for the blessings of a home, of where we grew up. It's a gratitude and appreciation, a desire to cultivate the best of where we came from. All of us have come from a certain place. C.S. Lewis wrote in his book, Four Loves, about the virtue of having that affection for the things, the places that are familiar, and wanting to leave them better than we found them when we were born into them. And I think it's a good thing. I think, the Bible commands us to be grateful in all things, to have an attitude of thanksgiving. And I think that's the root of a good, healthy patriotism. And honestly, I think everybody should be patriots of their countries wherever they're from. That does sometimes mean that we'll be critical of our countries if they do something wrong. I think it is truly patriotic to desire the good of the beloved. And if you love your country, you want to see your country do justice. And that means being critical of what your country does injustice. So that's, I think, a good, healthy patriotism.
Part of the definition of nationalism is for a group to want the government to give it privileged status. I mean, you've alluded to that. So for our conversation, that would mean Christians want the government to favor a Christian perspective as it makes decisions and enforces laws. So what is the difference between wanting the government to give Christianity special privileges, which is nationalism, and a Christian voting for candidates who support laws that are consistent with what that Christian believes are rooted in Christian values, in the faith? If this candidate won, wouldn't the end result be the same, that everyone would be obligated to adhere to laws that reflect an interpretation of Christian values? In a nutshell, I guess what I'm asking is, if a Christian makes voting choices based on how a candidate stands on abortion or the death penalty or other values convictions, is that person a Christian nationalist?
So it's not wrong to vote our values. Everybody does that, Christians and non-Christians alike. We can't help but do otherwise. We of course, vote for what we believe in. That's not nationalism of any kind. But let me try to find an example here for you. Let's think about school prayer.
Okay.
Back before 1963, in public schools, teachers would lead mandatory prayers. And that's an example of the government giving its full weight and backing to one specific religion over others. That, I think, is wrong, and that would be an example of what I'd call Christian nationalism. Whether you like that label or not, I think it's just wrong for the government to take a role in holding, defending, propagating, coercing participation in a specific religious ritual. There's some people today who want to bring back mandatory prayer in public schools, and I'd say that's simply trying to give an advantage to Christianity as a tribe. School prayer is not about Christian principles. It's not about justice and the love of neighbor and so forth. It's just about getting the state's backing for our tribe, and that's the wrong way of going about it. You asked about voting for a pro-life candidate. I'm pro-life. I don't think being pro-life is Christian nationalism. I know there's some people on the left who want to use Christian nationalism as a kind of a insult for any religious involvement in politics, and that's just not helpful or accurate. I will say that sometimes we can vote for the right policies, but maybe with the wrong heart attitude, that it is possible to advocate for good policies with the desire to enshrine our own tribal prerogative. And I think that also is unhelpful, but that's less a matter of policy and more about the heart.
How do you see Christian nationalism as a danger to the United States, as you do?
There's a spectrum here of Christian nationalism. Some of it is mainstream and peaceful, and I think wrong, but it is a danger in a more mild sense of being in tension with the principles of liberty and equality for all citizens, Christian and non-Christian alike. So that's one sense. There is a much smaller but more extreme version which can become quite dangerous and even violent. There's small examples of it here and there, and I do think the riot at the Capitol on January 6th of 2021 is an example where you saw symbols of Christian nationalism alongside many other things. There's a lot of stuff going on January 6th. There's some anti-government stuff, some conspiracy theories, some white nationalism. But when the rioters reached the floor of the U.S. Senate, they stopped for a prayer. And one of them shouted out, "Jesus Christ, we invoke your name." And as they prayed and thanked God for giving us our country back and showing that this is our country. That's very dangerous. That kind of mixing of religious rhetoric with a violent assault on the citadel of democracy is, I think, clearly dangerous for American democracy. Again, that's a small minority, but it is there. Let's not ignore it. The broader movement tends to be, peaceful and moderate, but I think misunderstands the relationship between our religion and our country.
And would another way of saying that is misunderstands the relationship between our religion and the Constitution?
Yes, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Okay. So why do you believe taking a careful look at Christian nationalism matters for people who follow Jesus Christ? Why do you see Christian nationalism as a danger to Christianity?
Yeah, that's a great question, and even more important than the earliest one you asked. Jesus came to show us the way to his kingdom, and that's the whole point. That's the whole point of our faith, is to look forward to a kingdom of perfect justice and perfect peace under the one true king. And he said very clearly, my kingdom is not of this world. I'm grateful for America, but it's really important that I don't confuse America for Jesus' kingdom. And if we start to orient our hearts towards America as if it were an ultimate thing, well, that's actually idolatry. And we misunderstand the entire gospel as if the gospel is all about making America great. And that's just not why Jesus came. That's the short version. There's a much longer answer I can give you, but there's a risk of idolatry in our hearts if we get this wrong.
In your book, The Religion of American Greatness, you identify the current progressive left as a religion, but one without grace. Perhaps in the future, you and I can talk about your coming book on the topic. Until then, though, thank you, Dr. Miller. Thank you for joining me today on Family Life's Inside Out.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to it. And this is part of a much bigger conversation. While we've talked about the dangers on the right, there's dangers on the left as well. And it's important to have that conversation as well.
I've been speaking with Professor Dr. Paul Miller, whose 2022 IVP academic book is The Religion of American Greatness, What's Wrong with Christian Nationalism. I'm Martha Manikas Foster with Inside Out on Family Life.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at familylife.org.